This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get now by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And today, I've invited two of my friends back onto the show in one instance and onto the show for the first time in the other to do something that I'm starting to really love doing on the show, which is forcing them to reread a book they didn't love, or in this case, 3 books, and having them come onto the show to talk about their experience reading those books for the first time and then rereading them again because I asked nicely. Devor and Drew from Clashing Sabers are here to talk to me about the Aftermath trilogy on the second installment of On Second Thought. I don't know how much space this laptop has.
Okay, let's close that window. Good grief.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I'm the only one who still uses Zoom, who does this whole podcasting thing. I feel like old somehow or like wrong for doing that. It's fine.
It does give me like pandemic vibes.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope that's not how like every guest that I invite on feels when I like send them the Zoom link and they log on and I start recording. Like I never thought of that before, and now I'm questioning everything.
You give every guest post-traumatic stress.
I mean, what if that's it though? And what if that's why like no one has ever come back twice?
Jeez.
Other than you, because I force you to. Are you? I think you're the only one, right? That has come back more than once. I think so.
Yes.
That can't possibly be true.
I think it is. But I also haven't gotten around to like authors coming on twice or no, I really think...
Alden.
Oh my God, I should have acknowledged that he was the first one that was a repeat guest. Wow. That's amazing. Congratulations to him, I'm sure.
You should build him like a little digital trophy and send it to him.
Oh, that would actually be kind of cute. Can you pull it? Oh, you don't have Canva Pro anymore.
No, but I can still do stuff on free. I'm a wizard.
You should have kept it.
Yeah.
You should have talked them into paying for it. Why are we here? Every time I do this, I feel like I don't know how to host a podcast anymore. And it's not that I don't know how to do it. It's just like I feel like I'm like there's like a spectrum, right? There's like you're totally in like the podcast hosting mode. But then there's the other end where you're like just chilling and hanging out with friends. And I feel like sometimes I go too far in the wrong direction and I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
Listen, Brandon and I started doing Clashing Sabers episodes 6 years ago.
Oh my God.
And we have yet to figure it out. Okay. Every episode is a disaster and fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. And that's kind of what makes it fun.
I mean, the one I was on was fun.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Well, Brandon wasn't there, so that's why.
Oh, God. Wow. This is gonna, I don't know.
You can't possibly be dreading it this badly.
No,
Devor,
I'm not.
what have you done to her to ruin this
Nothing.
expectation?
I have been tight-lipped for months.
Oh,
you have not said a word.
No.
You have not said a word. We listened to part of the book in the car and you didn't say anything.
No.
The restraint
my gosh.
that you have had.
It is impressive.
How have you kept silent all this time?
I have been waiting for this moment.
And we're finally here. And you know what? The universe said we're not going to do it when we planned, and I said we're still going to do it anyway. I'm not going to let this
Oh,
not
no,
happen.
absolutely.
Oh, that was like the most disappointing text I've ever had to send, to be like, hey, I can't record what I said because I knew we were all looking forward to this, but it worked out. It's fine. We're here.
We got nothing but time.
Yes. I don't know why I hesitated. Do you want to host this episode? I'm kidding. Do you want to, how about we start with you introducing yourselves? Because I don't always do that, but I feel like this medium warrants who are you and why are you here? Why are you here? What are you doing here?
Okay. Well, I'm Devore. I am your producer.
Mm-hmm.
And I am here to talk about Aftermath because it is first the first set of Star Wars canon books I read, and I didn't have a great reaction to them, and I wanted to revisit them, and yeah.
Did you really want to?
Not really. No.
Someone very lovingly convinced you.
Yes,
I'm so persuasive.
you are.
Which leads me to the most surprising guest that I got for this episode.
Cam, I'm shocked. I remain in disbelief that you got this man on this episode. Talk about these books.
What if I confessed here and now that I have never read these books? Plot twist.
I mean, like I've pulled episodes out of nothing before, so like I think we would be fine.
Well, I'm Drew from the Clashing Sabers network. Thank you guys for having me.
And you also had feelings about this trilogy when you read it.
The first time I read these books, I read them as they came out, and it nearly broke me.
No. Oh no. Well, I mean, that's why we're here.
Yes.
I started this series because I had a Star Wars book that I had read a long time ago that I did not like. Famously wrote a very, very awful review of it. We don't speak of it. And then I thought, like, you know, it had been what at that point 4 years, and I was like, I should probably, now that I'm in a different place in my life, try to reread this book again and see if I am changed. Spoiler alert, if you haven't listened to the episode, which you still should, I was changed. Did not have the same feelings at all about that book that I had the first time. And I thought to myself, I was like, I have to believe that rereading Star Wars books does something. I have to believe. I'm still going to believe, regardless of how this episode ends up going, that with time and with, you know, a different maybe perspective on things, maybe our opinions and our thoughts about these books change if we revisit them again. And so I decided to take the two people that I know that like the Aftermath trilogy the least to come onto the show and talk about the trilogy with me. I just because I like to suffer, I don't know. But we're here anyway, and there's no going back now. So what I want to try to do, this format is pretty experimental still, because when I did it, I just did it with myself. It was just me. But now that we're all here, I kind of want to take it and kind of like slowly, and I want to start with kind of trying to reflect on when we read these books the first time, and maybe where we were in our lives, what was going on, what was the context of anything surrounding when we read these books. And you can go in as much depth as you want to or not. Paint a picture for me of your first interactions with these books and kind of, you know, how you felt. And I will say, and I'm going to say this for the people listening, not you two, although maybe I do need to say it anyway. We're not here to completely tear apart these books. I mean, there's room for fair criticism on the show and in talking about books in general. but we're not like, if you're here and you're listening because you don't like this trilogy and you want us to talk about how much it sucks, you might be disappointed. I don't know. If you want to keep listening, you can, but like, this is going to be a fun conversation between people who like Star Wars and like Star Wars books, and who, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. I can't predict things. But you know, it's not going to go totally in the direction of like these books never should have happened. Because they're here, they're not going away, and that's the reality. But yeah, why don't whoever wants to start can kind of take me back to the time way back when you read Chuck Wendig's Aftermath books for the first time.
Mhm. Well, then let's go back in time to when the first one came out. What was it, 2015 or so?
Mhm.
I think. When I remember when it first came out, being the first kind of relaunch of the canon
Mhm.
and kind of telling the new stories leading up to The Force Awakens. It was very exciting. Went to my local public library and there were no copies available, which was disheartening among all things that could possibly have gone wrong. So I did the next best thing. I got the previous book that Chuck Wendig had wrote and said, let's just read that and get a sense of the author and see what it's like, because I had never read anything he had done before. And it was a book called Zeros. And I don't know if anybody in the world has read this book. It's not a Star Wars book, and it doesn't feel like a Star Wars book, and it made me concerned. So I just kind of waited my turn to get a copy of Aftermath and read it, and kind of was stunned a little bit. At how very different it is as a book in the Star Wars pantheon of books. Obviously, the very first thing that stands out to anybody who picks this book up is the present tense writing of these books, where everything is, this character goes here, then they say this. It's not the standard past tense, so it was definitely like very clear in your face, this is not your dad's Star Wars books anymore, kids. These are cool books. They're doing cool things now. And that was a little concerning. Now, like you said, I don't want to just take our time and just absolutely trash things, because that's not that much fun. So I will be we'll stick with professional. How about that?
Sure.
Rereading most of my notes as I read through these three books, I took a bunch of notes, which is not uncommon. I did not put them into a spreadsheet. That is uncommon. But the number of times I went back and reread my notes and said, oh man, that's overly snarky and yet still appropriate. I don't know how this happens.
Wow.
We will get to them as we go. But the book is very different, and it's kind of difficult to get through until you can orient yourself to the way in which it's written. The use of interludes to tell wildly disconnected stories was, I think, really interesting, and probably the most positive aspect to come out of these three books, because of the way in which it gave us so much more material to draw new characters, new stories, kind of launching off points for other artists to come in, take the information and run with it. So I liked a lot of the launch pad approach to some of the storytelling. Then there's the main story of the books. And these are characters that were written. It's kind of the nicest thing I can think of to say. Devor, you're gonna have to help me out here, because I'm not good at just monologuing for 20 minutes about things.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess I can start with like talking about when I first read them. So I had already mentioned this, you know, at the beginning of this, and probably in some other context when we've talked about Star Wars books. But these are the first books of the new canon that I read. I cannot remember why I picked these. I don't know.
Did you not read? You didn't read them as they came out?
No. So I would have read these at like end of 2019, beginning of 2020.
Oh, okay.
Holy cow. Okay.
Because that's when I started getting into the canon books. And like I said, I can't remember why I went with I don't know if it was something I heard on a podcast. I don't know if it was something I found on the internet. I don't remember the kind of source point for saying this is going to be my start.
Yeah.
So, but for whatever reason, I started with these. And so I remember, much like Drew said, being jarred by the use of the present tense, by the style of writing, which I will say one of the things that I did in this revisit was, in addition to, of course, revisiting a second time, I also consumed it through a new medium, i.e. audiobooks. So I listened to them this time, whereas the previous time I had read the physical copies. And one thing that I will say in terms of the difference in the experience is that in the audiobook format, the present tense is less grating. Because it starts to feel like a little bit more like you're blurring the line between like a book and, let's say, like an audio drama. So it kind of like toys with that. And so once you're listening to it, it feels like it feels a little less inorganic than it does when you're reading it on the page.
Yeah.
But I do remember.
It feels like a play read through.
Yes.
Like you're reading through like a high school drama meeting for kind of like for the first time. But to me, what that does is it creates this uncomfortable sense of what I have to say is important. And then I don't always feel like the text backs that feeling up. Because when reading through a play and working through like theater and drama, every little bit matters. And so taking that same feeling and imputing it upon a text where, not to say that everything doesn't matter in the book, but to say that everything has equal and ultimately supposed to have very high value, that doesn't come through in a lot of the rest of the text. To me, again, just I'm not a writer. The things I have to do all day have to deal with incredibly boring federal law. So my sense of writing style is not lightsabers and spaceships whizzing by. Not that lightsabers whiz by, but so it definitely has a structure that tends to, in just the author sense, writes in a lot of cliches that are dated in a very particular time frame. Everything, if it sounds like it was written exactly when it was written, and I worry that it's going to sound like that forever.
I think it's a very common, because another reason why we're here doing these books is there are a lot of people who do not love these books. There's a very mixed feeling about this trilogy as a whole and the author and the writing. And I think a lot of people at the most surface level just don't vibe with the writing style. And like that's a fair criticism, because it's very different than, let's just stay like in the context of like, if we're just reading Star Wars books, just for this particular point, like if you have read Star Wars book after Star Wars book after Star Wars book, and then you get to these books, it's very different, and it can feel very much like almost like not right. Not that there's anything wrong with the style itself, or the way that he presents things, or the present tense itself, but just especially if you're used to Star Wars books not being like this, and then you get to these were your first canon books, and then you get to these.
What a wild place to jump into.
I know.
The pool.
Yeah, but you get to these, and it's just it I think it feels very different, and therefore it's paced very differently, and that's hard, I think, for a lot of people. And like, it's fair to not like the books because of that, and there might be other reasons, and we'll keep talking about more and more things, but the writing style is unique. And it's Chuck Wendig. Like, if you've read anything else that he's ever written, that is like, if you pick this up, you will know that it's his writing. And so like, if you don't like that, if you don't like his writing, you don't like his writing, and that's not going to, change. Like, the books are written and they are the way that they are. And he's not writing anymore. So
he's not going to get you back on board later on in the book. Like, there's not a point where you're suddenly going to be like, oh, you know what? I love this style now. Like, this is for me. There's no change. And like you had said, like, as the first book, kind of post Disney purchase, this book came on the heels of a 9-book series, another 9-book series, a 19-book series, where Lucasfilm and Del Rey had spent years and years building these solid, Project Luminous style entries, where you had multiple authors working together to build cohesive storytelling adventures for about, when did New Jedi Order start? 98, 99, something like that.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
somewhere around there. So nigh unto 20 years ish
Yeah.
of training a Star Wars audience who we are notoriously bad at being untrained. Let's be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but then to come out of like, what's that one? The Fate of the Jedi series to go into this is like whiplash.
Yeah.
Which Wending is good at. I think he enjoys that rabble rouser, that upsetting the boat kind of vibe is what he thrives in, and that's great. That's fine. And I'm not sure that the rest of us were prepared for that. We were so ready to see more of what we had already enjoyed so much that this felt very, very different from what we were expecting.
Do you think that's a lot of do you think a lot of people who struggle with these books are people who followed Legends before they were Legends for a long time, and then when they got to this, because there were a couple books before these in canon.
That's true. You're not wrong about that.
But like, do you think a lot of it is like it was so jarring to people at the time who were maybe expecting more of a Legends vibe and then got this? Do you think that kind of just like turned people off a little bit?
I think it certainly didn't help because this is the first. This may be like the third or fourth adult level novel, because you had, I think, Tarkin is technically new canon. The Kanan and Hera origin story novel, who I can never remember the name.
A New Dawn.
There you go. Thank you.
Dark Disciple, I think, was earlier.
There you go. So, and what all three of those have in common is that none of them take place after the movies. So when I think about who's the person reading all the Star Wars books, they break down into three categories. There's the people who read the stuff that happens after Return of the Jedi ended. There's the people who read the prequel stories, all the Clone Wars books and stuff like Tarkin and Dark Disciple and A New Dawn. And then there's the Old Republic people way, way down the timeline, the opposite end. Those people aren't going to be affected by Aftermath as much. The prequel folk are probably not going to be affected as much. But those of us who lived and breathed and died in the world of what happened after the Battle of Endor, we were like, okay, we're the ones you guys are technically replacing our stories first. Let's see what you're doing with it. And this is what we got.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like, oh man, I lost all the Rogue Squadron books in the Yuzin Vong War for John Burrell and that one time that Sinjir spits a tooth out at a guy, and it's just like, okay, cool, let's go, buddy.
So you feel the same way about the writing specifically now that you did then?
Going into it knowing ahead of time how different it is makes a difference.
Okay.
Because you don't have to spend nearly as much time adjusting the way in which you read it, because you already know that, from page 1 to the end of book 3, it is the way that it is. And so I think having proper expectations set like that makes it an easier ride. It's not, I didn't remember as much of the story this from the first time I had read it to this time around. Like, the whole first book is about like the gang getting together and then like rescuing slaves. And I had no idea that was in the first book. Completely forgot that was a thing. Life Debt was a little bit more like, yeah, we're rescuing Wookiees again, but that's a story we've told in Star Wars like 4 or 5 different times at this point. So that was kind of what it was. And then Empire's End. Okay, Empire's End. We'll skip to what happened when Empire's End came out. And I know I've talked about this on Clashing Sabers before. There's a page in the book, and it is page 178. It is the end of the interlude where the Force, I don't even know if they have a name or anything, but it's the guys carrying the crystals, and they're all dying one by one on this journey. And they make it to the final end of their journey to a cave, and they're putting kyber crystals back. And I have no idea what's actually happening, but that's what I remember. The last surviving character recites a poem of some sort or mantra. It's not super clear, but I took a picture of it because like I knew we were going to talk about this because this is very important. And it says, the truth in our soul is that nothing is true. The question of life is, what then do we do? The burden is ours, to penance we hew, The Force binds us all from a certain point of view. Okay, hang on. What's going on in this moment is that the phrase from a certain point of view is being used in the Jedi Order as a mantra of sort and kind of like a focal point, in essence of the teaching. And what we're trying to do really is rehabilitate that one scene in Return of the Jedi where Obi-Wan is like, well, I didn't really lie from a certain point of view. It's like, okay, now I see the code through the Matrix. And it really kind of bothered me the first time around, and I stopped reading the book at that point. I had not
no.
finished Empire's End until this read through.
Oh my God. What? No.
So I stopped at that point and it was like, I can't do this. This is too like going back and rewriting the way a thing was written is not okay. This again is the 2016, 2017 version of whenever this was reading my reaction to it. I was like, I so bumped on that I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, this book is clearly not for me. The whole interlude is bonkers itself, but just having that one moment of like, I'm going to go out of my way and write a chapter, and the chapter is going to end with a stinger, and the stinger is Obi-Wan's not nearly as bad as you think he is in that one moment in Return of the Jedi. Like, that's what we're doing with our time? We're trying to rehabilitate a line from 1983? We got spaceships to blow up and Death Star trenches to fly down and all this kind of fun stuff, and you're interested in that. Oh no. And then just by sheer like I like to find these weird moments of strange happenstances. If, for example, like I just finished reading The Courtship of Princess Leia, the Essential Legends collection, which, by the way, that book's amazing and no one told me.
It's so good.
It's amazing. I can't believe how good. Anyway, the first line in The Courtship of Princess Leia, ostensibly a book about Princess Leia, the first three words are General Han Solo. Kind of a funny, odd thing here. So again, after this page 178 in Empire's End, this paragraph that ends from a certain point of view, turn the page, next chapter starts. The first two words are John Burrell, and I was like, no, come on, it doesn't get any better. He's my least favorite character in this entire book. He's just not my favorite human being.
Now I need to know what you like. Okay, so you'd never read the actual ending of the
Nope.
of the last book, and so now you have.
I have.
Has that changed how you feel at all? Like, now that you finally got through it, you finally know how it ends.
I knew how it ends thanks to the blessed folk that live over at the Wikipedia. It's pretty easy to just be like, okay, so Rey Sloane survives. Thank the Lord. The most interesting character in the entire saga. Gallius Rax, spoiler alert, Gallius Rax does not survive. I was shocked at how that Sloane and Nora get pinned together and have this adventure out in the Jakku wasteland. I think that was pretty good. That was at least kind of surprising, and I was invested in Rey Sloane more than anybody else in this series. Like, she's definitely the most fascinating character and probably could have been the most important thing we had for this whole post Endor, pre Force Awakens era. Like, could have been the big bad for the entire series or the entire, sequence of events between here. But she hasn't even cropped up since then. Like, we've had the Shadow Council and the Mandalorian, but poof, gone, not present. So clearly something's happened there. So I would very much love to see what happened to Rey Sloane after her adventures here.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you bring that up, because the next thing I was going to ask was, is this book also kind of a struggle because it focuses so much on new characters that we technically don't have a lot of emotional investment in, unlike a lot of Legends where you are focused on the Han, Leia, and Luke of it all a lot of the time. Not all the time,
right?
But like,
right.
especially if you get past Return of the Jedi, like a lot of that is like they keep those characters in there or they pop up often, possibly for that reason. But
I don't know that it has to do exclusively like with that.
Yeah.
Because if I think about like the Alphabet trilogy,
right.
Shadowfall, Victory's Price, those three are amazing. Those are a wonder. You get all the fun characters there, and you don't have any of the main characters returning for those stories. And I feel like the cast in the Alphabet trilogy do a great job of holding at least my attention. I thought those were really interesting books, but I also feel like they were trying to say something.
Yeah.
Like I felt like there were good themes and interesting questions that they wanted to address within those books. The characters in here, first off, if you're gonna have a book with Wedge Antilles and he's not the best person in the book, like he's not the superhero of the book, what are you doing? This is the hero of the rebellion. Put a little respect on the man. He blew up 2 Death Stars virtually by himself. All right, he didn't technically blow up the first one, but he survived the attack on the first one. And yet we have to deal with Temmin Wexley yelling at him because he won't date his mom or something weird. I don't remember why, but there's a scene where he's yelling at Wedge. I'm like, you don't yell at Wedge Antilles, hero of the rebellion.
How are you feeling? You've not gotten a lot of.
She's done with me.
I'm not done with you. I don't want to invite him on and not let him speak.
Thank you.
Devore should know to interrupt me by any time he has to say something. That's totally fine.
All right. So I'm just trying to think of like natural jumping off points from things that Drew has brought up, as opposed to just taking us in a completely different direction.
Which page did you want to quit on?
I think for me, like the reaction that I had particularly on Reread was like, I read through the first one, and I think the first one, I definitely had a better impression on Reread. Like I got through the first one, I was like, I think this is like a solid like 3.5. Like this is like, it's not the best Star Wars book out there, but it's not the worst one I've read. Like it is a solid kind of middle of the road, like quality story. I think some of the wheels start coming off the bus in Life Debt. I think that there's a lot of fat in the middle part there of the story, and I think that like actually I want to advance. I was thinking about this particularly in the context of Life Debt, because so much of Life Debt is, as you said, Drew, like is centered on the story about Kashyyyk and freeing the Wookiees. And as I was listening to that, and also having since getting through Aftermath read a couple other books, I wanted to sort of advance this thesis and get your thoughts on it. I think Han Solo is a harder character to write than people give him credit for. I think the universe of people who think they know how to write Han Solo is much larger than the people who know how to write Han Solo.
Yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts on that.
I would second that strongly. I would say that almost I'm trying to think of the best written page version of Han Solo, and it's nothing comes to mind immediately. Like Han Solo is Harrison Ford on screen, and if it's not Harrison Ford on screen, it's not Han Solo. Like there's something missing to that, the tenor of the voice, and there's something with the characterization that doesn't live up to what we've seen. Now, that is an impossible task. So do we hold authors to the standard of you must not only strive for the impossible task, you must also meet it? That doesn't seem like a realistic expectation to set on anything. So, but I do feel like as a character, he's kind of used as a crutch too. Like I think in stories, authors will tend to rely on some of those classic characters, and including Han as a fan favorite, so that they have something that people will enjoy.
Right. And I think like, yeah, because I think about, for example, the Han that we get in Aftermath. And again, that discrepancy between like the people like who like think they're writing Han right versus the folks I think really get him. Like,
Mhm.
I think the folks who fall into the latter camp, and I think Aftermath Han falls in that category, is they very much do lean into like the kind of early New Hope, the kind of like cynical, like
Mhm.
biting
Mhm.
scoundrel part. And I mean, that's an important part of Han, but there is also the like the warmth of him, like that I think sometimes gets missed in terms of the mix of the different parts of his personality.
Yeah. I it's difficult because just from the chair that I sit in, the most interesting Han Solo is Empire Strikes Back Han Solo.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because of him and Leia together.
Yeah.
And by the time you get through Return of the Jedi, he's not quite the same guy anymore.
Right.
Right? There's something that's just not quite firing the exact same way. And I think authors tend to write more the Return of the Jedi Han than they do the Empire Han. Or like you were saying, they tend to lean in towards A New Hope Han.
Mhm.
And while chronologically that may make sense, because if you're going to write a story that takes place a year after Return of the Jedi, you can't write him like he was 5 years ago. But at the same time, he's not as much fun as he was 5 years ago. But
right.
So there's definitely something to like the main characters as they come back. I do have a better appreciation now for the way in which Leia was used in these books, though. I think Leia's character is very interesting. She's a lot of fun in these books. I'm also a sucker for like, let's build a government and let's put people in committees and let's hold hearings. Like that's fun stuff for me to read. I really enjoy that stuff. So the Mon Mothma stuff in Empire's End is a lot of fun for me. Except she's got some weird ableism in this one where it was like so very early in the book, or one of my notes says Mon Mothma basically thinks amputees or the disabled are less than fully human and only remind her of Darth Vader. Why don't they remind her of Luke? I mean, he's an interesting characterization, and I love that kind of like building of the New Republic stuff. So Empire's End had more highs for me. It just has that one glaring page we should just not talk about anymore.
I really like where it all ends up. I feel like it is at some points a rough journey to get to where they wanted to end it, but I do personally really like how it finally did get there. And the ending is like because it'd been a while since I read these books too. I started reading them, I think, after they'd started coming out, but I think I read Empire's End as it came out. I think I'd caught up by then, and I didn't remember a lot of that last book or the other two. But I remember liking the ending then, and I loved it now. It's still just it sticks with me as like there are some characters, there are a lot of points that may not be as memorable, but I think like getting everyone to the end point and showing like where they're going from there, because these characters or some of them do come back in other stories later. But I liked where it ended up. But I'm not totally like I love these books, but I'm not totally like against the idea that like some of it is forgettable. That's definitely a fair criticism because it's especially Life Dead. There's a lot, and I didn't remember almost anything that happened.
Same. That's the one. Even on reread now, that's the one I struggle with, and I agree with you. Like in terms of I think Empire's End does kind of bring it like I don't know if you want to use the phrase sticks the landing, but at least it kind of like brings it back to like giving you a pretty decent finish to the trilogy after some of the struggle in the middle.
It feels like it has more, it knows where the story wants to go. Where Life Dead, I don't really feel like, I don't understand why this is a story that these characters are on. Like, I'm not entirely sure what the connecting thread from the first book to the third book, this book is playing. Like, what role is the storytelling? Other than like, let's put them in with characters that we've already met before, which, again, is fine. And sometimes you need to do that. But like you said, it's probably the way in which Empire's End is focused to say, okay, we know we need to get to here. A battle of Jakku has to occur. Let's get the characters there and let's make things happen. And that is fun. I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because I think to build off that point, like I think that is one of the challenges about Aftermath. I mean, I think there are ways in which you can say it is a plus of the trilogy, and I think also is something that kind of hampers the story, which is that there is a lot of sprawl. Like there's a lot that it's trying to do. It is trying to tell this kind of a plot of like, here's this kind of resurgent empire that you thought was gone, but they're still out there. And here's this kind of plucky band of rebels who, are going to try to lead the fight and expose like what's really happening out in the kind of frontier. So you've got that, and then you've got all of these, whether it's like the interludes or some of these other things that are trying to do kind of this more state of the galaxy stuff. And I think the state of the galaxy stuff is interesting to see, like all of the kind of ripple effects from the kind of collapsing empire. But it does just mean that you are in a lot of places and you're going on a lot of journeys, and so sometimes you do have the situation of like you get to the where you're like, what did happen in life like what is in that book, because there's so many stories that it's trying to tell all at once.
And some of those are interesting stories too. Like it would be really neat to know the story of Cobb Vanth. And that was great that he's kind of set up and with this moment, like you're kind of given hints and clues about what's happening, and it's very interesting. And they picked that up later on. This was the first time I ever realized that Kiza, the character from Shadow of the Sith, comes from. Which was, I had no idea about that.
Forgotten.
I did, yeah. Like I looked when I read through that section, I was like, this is really interesting. I wonder what happens with these characters. And then I found Kiza's entry in Wikipedia. I was like, wait a minute, it's the same character? That was neat. I can appreciate that. What else?
I mean, I think if we're going to talk about the interludes of Aftermath as a kind of like storytelling device, we have to talk about the most controversial one, and the one that gets particularly people who don't like Aftermath. One of the reasons they don't like Aftermath is because of one particular interlude involving a certain prequel character.
You're not
talking
talking
about Jar Jar.
Oh, you don't want to talk about Masamita being rescued by kids?
Oh, the Masamita stuff is some of my favorite stuff in this book. I love his old plot there.
No, really?
No, mostly no. Again, like some of the kind of like weird Children of the Corn stuff that starts to happen in Empire's End is like weird, like between like the kids who rescue him and then the like bloodthirsty child soldiers that don't talk and go around killing people. That stuff gets weird.
Who? What? Which draft? Questions, so many questions of where a lot of weird things with kids in these books.
Yes,
a lot of weird kid actions. I don't know. So you want to talk about Jar Jar?
Yeah, I think I want to talk about B because people have such a visceral reaction about the Jar Jar interlude.
Familiarize me with what the controversy is, because I've written about this interlude before, but from a perspective of like I liked it and I found a lot of depth in it, but clearly a lot of people don't.
I actually in the minority of also liking it, and we can talk about why, like why I think it works and why I don't necessarily vibe with the criticism of it. But the criticism of it actually goes back to something Drew was talking about earlier on in the episode about like how the books sometimes feel like they are a creature of the time in which they are written. And one of the critiques of the Jar Jar interlude is like it feels like a kind of leaning into the making fun of Jar Jar and the Jar Jar hate that really kind of existed pre the last couple of years, where you sort of had the kind of Ahmad Renaissance and people very much like sort of reappraising and reevaluating that character and all that. So there's a lot of people who feel like by having that interlude all be about how people hate Jar Jar and he's become this kind of circus act and people make fun of him, that it is leaning into a particular moment in time where that was more kosher than it is now.
It's
now I don't agree with that interpretation, but I'm gonna let Drew go ahead.
No, I would say it's extremely dark. Like that
Yes.
section is it's there's no hope. There is no lightness to it. And
Yeah.
all you feel is the weight of the depression that Jar Jar is in. Like he has the entire galactic civil war on his shoulders.
Yeah.
And that is not appropriate. Not only is it not realistic for the character, but like that's not Star Wars. Star Wars always ends with hope. Like literally the first movie is called A New Hope. It's, I'm going to channel my inner Brandon for a minute. Star Wars is about, always about hope. It's always about found family, and it's always about the ability to come back from your worst decisions. Like those are the three tenets that uphold what makes a Star Wars thing a Star Wars thing. This interlude breaks all three of those rules. Now, if you're going to break a rule, that's fine. Like I'm all about breaking the rules for storytelling purposes, which is why Ronin is the best Star Wars book ever written, and I will fight people on that.
I need to have you on the show to talk about that book.
Name the time and the place, because me and three other people on planet Earth think that's the best Star Wars book, and we are tight friends. But if you're gonna break rules, you have to do something with it that makes worth it. You have to give us something, teach us something new, or break the rules in such a way that it redeems the rules, kind of thing. This section does nothing. Like all it does is tell us that we were right to hate Jar Jar because the universe hates him too, and that hurts, man. Like. Yeah. There are kids who love Jar Jar when it first came out. There are kids now who love it. Brandon on our podcast told a story one time that I almost cried at, because he teaches like 4th or 5th grade kids reading. And he got a book in his class and it talks about Jar Jar. And one of the little girls said, "Oh, this is my favorite book. Like, I want to read this every day." And he was like, "Really? It's about Jar Jar?" And the kid told him, she said, Jar Jar is an outcast and nobody understands him. And I feel like that. But when I see Jar Jar happy, it makes me happy. Right? Right?
I'm fine.
Right? Like, I'm not the world's biggest Jar Jar fan. I'm not a defender, but he fits. He belongs. He doesn't need to be, this outcast in the galaxy anymore. It's fine. But so yeah, that's kind of like where the issue with that chapter comes from, is like time and place, guy. Time and place. This ain't it. Let's remember that things get better in the universe. Star Wars is always about finding the new hope and then finding your family and sitting there along with the ride. Which ostensibly the rest of these books are about. Like all of these guys come together, and by the time Empire's End wraps up, like they're all wildly in love with one another, except for John Burrell, who doesn't make it.
I forgot about that too. I was like, "Oh, what?"
I was shocked. Like at a certain point, you're like, "Wait a minute, isn't there like a 5th guy in this crew? He hasn't been mentioned in the past 100 pages." You don't even find out until like after the battle's over. He jumps out of like the landing craft to try and catch a missile to drag it down so it doesn't blow up the craft. Okay, a bridge too far, guys. Come on. He's the weirdest character in the whole book.
Yeah, so just to kind of like finish off the conversation on the Jar Jar interlude, I think for me, why it works, like one of the other critiques about that interlude, or particularly like the kind of the storyline of it, is people making the point of like, well, the galaxy hates Jar Jar and like they blame him for things, but really like things like the Clone Wars and the Rise of the Empire really aren't his fault. And I think in some ways, again, this might just be my own reading of the interlude, is that like that is sort of the point of the interlude,
Right.
is like it's a commentary about like where blame ends up, which is that like it is easier for people in the galaxy to say that the reason the Empire happened and why Palpatine rose to power is because of doofuses like Jar Jar Binks, who got conned into going along with giving him power and stuff, rather than blaming whether it be like, political figures who had more influence, or kind of just like larger systems, or like the Senate and corruption and like much bigger things. It is easier to just concentrate one's contempt into this, this low-hanging fruit that is Jar Jar, rather than saying, well, actually, it's a symptom of a bigger problem. And so Jar Jar becomes the conduit through which that anger and resentment gets channeled, at least kind of like locally within Naboo. But like the point is that it's not his fault, but that he is the easy punching bag for people.
So you're positing that the interlude is more of like, hey, reader, you made Jar Jar the scapegoat, and you see how bad everybody's treating him. You're treating him the same way. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, I think it's a commentary on a
here?
kind of like revisionism that happens,
Hmm.
where we blame individuals, or we kind of find our scapegoats, and then we miss the forest through the trees.
That is a level of credit you're willing to extend that I'm not willing to extend. I don't know. It's the same author who uses the verb piston to punch somebody like 4 times in the first book. Ray pistoned her fists into Nora Wexley's solar plexus. And like 20-page letter. So somebody else pistons their fists. Like, okay, we get it.
I don't know, with those kinds of things, I don't know if this is just like there's something wrong with me, but like because Chuck Wendig does this a lot. He's very good at writing about anarchy, and he's very good about like not resolving things, or like leaving you feeling very sad about the world. That's just kind of, if you're gonna read his books, that's just kind of what you kind of have to expect. I don't expect Star Wars fans to be like, this is what I'm prepared for, because it's very, in some ways, not Star Wars, like you said. But I don't know. I kind of feel like with this interlude in particular, like kind of like it seems to end like very like not hopeful at all. But I kind of like, because that's not the end of the series, right? And like, even though we never go back to figure out like what happens after that, like I like to believe that like maybe like the galaxy maybe got a little better, and like maybe there was hope for him later. I don't know. Maybe not, but like there could have been. I think sometimes like the thing with his writing is I think sometimes he resolves certain things, but on purpose doesn't bring you back to resolve everything, because he's kind of relying on you to maybe think that like, oh, maybe like some things do get better even if we never see that they do.
Interesting.
That's just how I approach, these things. But I appreciate the context of like what the controversy actually was, because I saw people, at the time criticizing this and being like, oh, I can't believe this happened, but I couldn't remember like exactly why they were mad. And I didn't know if it was like, oh, people are just mad for the sake of being mad, or if there was actually a reason behind it. And I'm glad that there was. So, and that's fair. It's fair, because the other thing is that, and this kind of speaks to the conversation we're having as a whole, is like, it's one book, but everyone who reads it is going to maybe read certain things of it a little differently. And there's nothing wrong with that. And two people will interpret one scene 2 completely different ways and maybe not agree on what it's actually saying. And like, no, neither of those people is wrong. And the whole point of books, the whole point of stories, is that we're allowed to interpret we're allowed to interpret things differently. That's like kind of the whole point. What we do with that is a whole other thing, but
sure. And the way in which we interpret things and kind of the way in which we understand things reveals a lot about ourselves too.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of personal introspection to say, okay, am I reading more of myself into this than I'm supposed to? Or what is the author's intent here? And how is that being conveyed? Am I doing a faithful enough job of putting my own preconceptions on a shelf, and to say that, I come from this particular background, so I'm interpreting things in a wildly different way that the author intended to, because they didn't even grow up nearly the same way that I did. It's not entirely impossible. That's what happened. I think the challenge is when we can't figure it out. Like, if there's not enough information or not enough clarity provided in order to make an educated, thoughtful, and responsible understanding of what the author's intent is, then we're in the deep water with no floaties.
Yeah.
Because you're right, where everyone should absolutely bring their own interpretations to it, but the author wrote that for a reason.
Right.
And I think you're probably the closest one to it, Meg, because if you're more familiar with the author's work, then you understand more of, oh, he likes to leave you on, the ledge, and
Yeah.
he lets you decide if you're going to jump or not. It's not like a Quentin Tarantino movie where you spend 2 hours with guys, you get to love them, and then it turns out they're all the devil. It's like, ha, you fell in love with the bad guy, sucker, got you again. You can expect that kind of a thing from that, but here maybe we just weren't properly prepared for that.
I think that's something like the more Star Wars books that I read and the more I explore books from Star Wars authors that are not Star Wars, it's like it's very interesting how like when you do that, when you go off and like I'll read E.K. Johnson's other books or I'll read
Ooh.
Delilah Dawson's other books that she's written, you kind of start to recognize like authors obviously are right when they write a Star Wars book, they're still bringing their voice and their writing style and everything to the Star Wars book. The only difference is that it's a Star Wars book. And obviously there's a lot of work that goes on to make it a Star Wars book. There's a lot that goes into making a Star Wars book. But you start to like really see like, oh, like the author made a choice here or phrased something here or structure this in a certain way that maybe like a lot of people didn't like, but really they didn't do it because they wanted to like make Star Wars more like their other stuff. Like that's just they're bringing themselves into writing a Star Wars book. And I think there's only so much you can do to kind of like control that. And that's kind of just how it is. And so like a lot of people I think maybe just kind of like we already talked about, don't like a certain author or don't like a certain way of writing, don't like a certain thing. And it's not even always about the book itself. It's just sometimes you don't vibe with an author. And I think that happens a lot. And I think that's okay. And I think that's why one of the reasons I always would try to say that it's okay if you don't love every Star Wars book, because every Star Wars book is so different from the one next to it that like I think it's maybe almost impossible to love every single one because there are going to be authors or stories or characters that you just don't connect with. And that's like Star Wars books are written for anyone who wants to come to them, whether or not you totally connect with them. It, sometimes you're not going to, and it's not you and it's not the writer always. It's just sometimes the two don't come together.
Right. It's a wide enough pool where there's something for everybody's kind of tastes and sensibilities. If you like one kind of thing, you go over here and over this shelf. If you don't like that, there's 3 more shelves you can check out as well.
Right.
No, I like that. And I think we need to have weirder, more diverse kinds of voices because there's different stories that just need to be told, and we can't all tell the same story. So we got to have different people out there and different styles, and we got to write things in weird prose formatting, and we got to have I, Jedi, which is written in first person, and you're like, what is this about? And I'm like, okay, I'll give that a shot. And it turns out Corran Horn is amazing.
That's one issue I had with Heir to the Jedi is it's also written in first person. And when I first read the book, that was one of the criticisms I chose to latch onto for some reason. It's really not that bad when you read it the second time, but
which one is that? Heir to the Jedi? Is that
that's a Luke book. So that's like this was like early canon. This is like 20.
Is that Jason Fry wrote that one?
Oh no. Who wrote that book?
Hang on. This is why we have the internet.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Did this book come out in 2013? Or maybe 2014. It's very early.
Yeah.
And it's the story behind it is that it was supposed to be a Legends book and it got transferred over into canon. And that's not maybe the reason why it's the way it is, but it's like it's Luke right after A New Hope trying to like figure out his life. And it's not a bad book. It's just very jarring in a lot of different ways. But the first person is one of those things.
For the record, it was Kevin Hearn, not Jason Fry. So I was way off. When were you released? 2015.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah.
Well,
Dude,
2015
yeah.
had a lot going on in books.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot going on that year. Well, again, Force Awakens too.
Yeah.
So it was a big year. We were finally getting everybody who had been working on this new Star Wars stuff for 2-3 years finally got to put it out into the universe and see how it went. Some went great, and that's excellent. We should be happy about that. I have small little notes about sections that always stood out to me. I don't know if
Okay.
you have any other big conversations you want to have.
Go with your notes, and if anything else comes up, we'll run with it.
I only have. I swear this is my last John Burrell crack. I promise you. But on in the first book, where obviously we meet everybody for the first time in the first one, page 270. So we're very new to the world of John Burrell. He is sent to Akiva, the planet, to
Mhm.
I don't remember what his original thing was going to do. But he on page 270, he changes his own orders from going to a comms tower to assist in an insurrection. And my note here is this guy was definitely in DC on January 6th, no doubt.
No. No.
No, you're right.
Just-
Oh,
Just think about it for a minute. No context. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Okay. Do. Empire's End has a couple that were just like baseball bat to the temple, weird things. Very beginning, page 18. Devore, you'll appreciate this. Nora Wexley says, revenge and justice are two sides of the same coin. No, they're not. They are different things, and you should know better. And then the subnote I have for that is her whole characterization is you should have known better.
What is that the point though?
If it is, and I think you're right. I think that is the point of the Nora Wexley character, and what a terrible point that is. Like, imagine you're a main character in a book, and the whole reason you're a main character in the book is to tell people you should know better. Like, I feel so bad for her. It's rough. It's rough, man. Oh, Empire's End is also where we meet the Senator Tolwar Wartol. He's
yeah.
kind of the antagonizing senator. It's literally his name is the same two syllables but reversed. And you could tell I was reading this around Christmas because my next note is it's just like Burgermeister Meisterburger from the Santa Claus movies. Yep, that's the kind of top shelf quality analysis we like to bring over at Clashing Sabers.
How have we gotten this far in the conversation and not mentioned Mr. Bones one time?
I don't know. I don't know.
Mr. Bones
Oh,
the
I had
best part of this
forgotten.
entire trilogy?
Yes.
Is he the redeeming quality?
Oh,
Yes.
he is definitely a part of this trilogy. There's no
Yes, he
denying
is
he
the
is
best
in
part of the
these
trilogy.
books. Oh no. I was trying to make it through the entire thing without him.
He is delightful and I love him.
Did you get the poster that came with the book and hang it up in your
No.
bedroom? No? Oh, there was artwork with this one.
Oh man.
I'm gonna find it on eBay and send it to you for Christmas. You put it next to your Taylor Swift Eras Tour poster right next to
Yes.
it. It's exactly the type of honor it deserves. Oh man, we also haven't mentioned the worst bounty hunter on planet Earth, Mercurial Swift.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes just names tell you these characters are insane, right? Like you just have to go, oh, he named him this way on purpose. Mercurial Swift. Like Mercury is famously not swift. I just can't sometimes. Oh my goodness. One more thing about Life Debt.
Mhm.
Life Debt had the prelude, which is where you meet Gallius Rex as like a little boy, and he
Mhm.
sneaks on board Palpatine's shuttle. This is ultra petty, so I apologize, but not really. The opening part is called the prelude. The closing section of the book is called an epilogue. The opposite of prelude is postlude. The opposite of epilogue is prologue. Why are we being inconsistent? Come on now. Low-hanging fruit, guys. That's all I'm asking you to get.
All right. So we all read these books.
Yes.
And then
undeniably.
And then I made us all come back and read them again. Would you say you were able to experience them a little bit more positively the second time than you did the first time?
I mean, statistically, it's almost you have to. Yes, absolutely. I think there was a lot of pressure when these books were first come out to be as good as the first time a Star Wars thing comes out.
Yeah.
Like the first real Star Wars books that really made a splash, the Thrawn trilogy. I mean, yeah, you had early stuff like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but it wasn't really intended to restart an entire galaxy, like the way the Thrawn trilogy was, like the way Force Awakens was, like the way the Phantom Menace was. So I think the burden of expectations was crushingly heavy.
Yeah.
And then when you zig so hard when the audience is expecting you to zag, it's just doubly harsh. And I don't know, the heavy expectations is our fault as an audience. We really should have checked our expectations at the door and said, let's just give it a chance to see what it's like. We're not good at that. We're just not.
No.
We line up outside of a movie theater and we measure the time we do so in days. That's insane. So going back this time, it was much more exciting. The ability to let things go is a superpower that everybody should work to have, and to just sit back and enjoy the show sometimes. Some Star Wars books have, I think, some really deep thematic implications, real questions of what does it mean to be human, and to find your identity in heroes, and that's really important. Some Star Wars books are about cool ship, go fast, go shoot things up, and that's cool too. And these books are kind of like, the Ocean's 11 of the Star Wars universe. Let's get some disparate characters, let's set them on a crazy mission, they'll meet some old friends along the way, and it turns out they save the galaxy too. How cool is that? So I think there's definitely, if you can go in understanding this isn't intended to change your life, this isn't going to be a milestone marker in anybody's love and appreciation for the Star Wars. Like, no one's gonna, you can't go into these books not having read or seen Star Wars beforehand and expect to come out as big a fan as those of us who on a Friday night decide to get together and talk about books that we read 20 years ago or 10 years ago and did it again for fun. Like, it's not going to turn you into that. That's okay. Yeah. We shouldn't expect that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more fun here than I remember there being. It's just kind of funny that some of the things that drove me absolutely batty still do.
I think it's so interesting how it still feels to me even sometimes like every single new Star Wars book that comes out, we all have such like high expectations, not for it to be good, but for it to be like galaxy shifting, for it to like always completely change our perspective or give us new context or something. And like sometimes a Star Wars book does not do that. Sometimes a Star Wars book is just a story that's fun to read, that enriches the galaxy, but maybe not in the ways we expect. And like I feel like that's a good thing sometimes. And I think to expect every single book to like make some kind of splash like that, that's putting too much pressure on the people making the books, I think.
Yes, 100% agree.
And that's not fair. And we can't like consistently expect that kind of thing, because like the other problem with that is if we expect every book to be that revolutionary, then like the books aren't going to feel revolutionary when they're supposed to. That's why they're designed this way. Sometimes you get a book that doesn't change everything. that's just really, really fun. I thought the
Mhm.
Aftermath books, like, they have their flaws, but I had so much fun reading them again. Like, I was just legitimately, because I listened to the audiobooks this time, just having a really good time. And when I finished them, and being able to read these without the context of having to review it straight or having to wonder what other people were going to say about it because it happened so long ago, like, I just enjoyed myself. And it was very refreshing to be able to do that. And to be able to be like, oh, like, I just had a good time and now I can put the books down and move on to other things and not have to worry about it.
Mhm.
That was so fun. And I feel like it's so more people need to do that, to just read a Star Wars book just for the sake of reading a Star Wars book and enjoying it because you like Star Wars.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, why can't you people just have fun? Have you heard of fun? And this is me saying that. Famously not known to be a fun person.
I think you're pretty fun.
I
I
Oh.
agree.
I appreciate that, guys. I'm just digging for compliments now. I think it is good that we have like an opportunity every so often to have like these one-off kind of stories to be told. Like, we got Shadow of the Sith not too long ago. Brotherhood came out not too long ago. Those here's a book, here's a story, enjoy it. And I also really like the long form storytelling things of like the High Republic or the New Jedi Order. Those things,
Yeah.
that scratches a very particular itch in the back of my heart. And so an equal balance of those things is absolutely important. But the problem comes, Meg, like you had said, when we take, okay, I know the High Republic is going to be 15 books long. Book
Mhm.
1 is going to be super important, and so is book 15. We can't put the same importance and the same value as we're doing on that to these one-off stories because they're not designed to do that. So, that doesn't give them a pass to not be worth reading. But again, it's something I learned just recently when reading The Courtship of Princess Leia. This was a book no one ever talked about to me when it first came out when I was younger. And when you see a book that says The Courtship of Princess Leia and you're like a 12-year-old boy, you're like, this is clearly not for me. But it's also the first place we got Dathomir. It's where we got the Witches of Dathomir. It's where we got Princess Solder, who's very important when it comes to the New Jedi Order. So when we skip over these one-offs, we're doing a disservice to ourselves as well. Like to deprive yourself to say, "Oh, this isn't part of a larger narrative. It can't possibly be important." Now, come on, be realistic.
Yeah.
So there's a place for these kinds of, and it's not appropriate to talk about the Aftermath trilogy as a one-off because being 3 books is pretty impressive by itself, and the number of places that those characters and whatnot have been picked up in other storylines is impressive. We wouldn't have season 2 of The Mandalorian go the way it did, nigh unto perfection without that. We wouldn't have things like the Shadow Council without the Aftermath trilogy. You wouldn't have the same person in Shadow of the Sith without that. So that's important, and it's nice that the last thing I have on that is that I appreciate that Lucasfilm and the author groups here don't ignore these things after they're written either. Like they're not embarrassed to go back and say, what else can we use? Like, what else does this have in it that we can, not necessarily stretch, but also apply in a different area.
Yeah.
And use it and say, you're still part of the team. You're still part of the family, even though you're weird. As the weirdo in the family, I appreciate that very much. So, spend some time there. If you haven't read Aftermath in a long time, give it a shot. It's ridiculous, but sometimes that's okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah,
Ronin. I know we haven't talked about Ronin in 15 minutes, so it's time for me to bring it back up again. The best book that has the word Star and Wars on it. Nothing else is better. Brandon's not here to argue with me about it. I'm so thankful.
I should have you two on an episode to be like, you're on opposite ends of how you feel about this book, and then you just go off.
It's literally called Clashing Sabers for that very reason. It's not called We Love Everything Sabers. The whole point of us talking about it was like, wait, you hate this? It's amazing. And so
Love it.
we've had
I
this
love
exact conversation.
So my final thoughts on Aftermath.
Please.
Yeah. So I think like, it's a series of books with. I mean, I think
Accurately described so far. 10 out of 10. I'm vibing with you, buddy. Go for it. It's a series of books.
that's your title of the episode. It's a series of books.
Better than what I titled the Zoom meeting.
No,
Well,
title you should go with.
yeah, you're the one who likes to be the positive ones. That's your call.
But I think we've talked about this before, which is that like Aftermath goes in and it has this really kind of big. We were just talking about kind of expectations for books and like the things that we place on them. Like it had a big expectation on it, which is that it pretty much had to like it was given the assignment of like give the actual end to the original trilogy. Like everyone thinks it ends with Endor, but write the actual ending, which is every like Jakku and everything that goes up to it.
Wow.
So it had that, and it had this. It also had the task of setting up a series of stories, i.e., the sequel trilogy, that no one had yet seen.
Yeah.
And that, Force Awakens, from a production timetable standpoint, already existed, but it wasn't out there, and neither were the subsequent 2 installments, so nobody knew where it was going. And so, in those 2 contexts, you are then assigning this one author to write this story that is going to have this really important connective tissue between a set of stories that a lot of people really love and are really invested in, and a set of stories that no one has seen yet. And so, in that sense, it was, the expectations were high and the task was high. And, as Drew talked about, it is like within canon, like it has had one, like whatever you feel about, like you like the books, you don't like the books, you're kind of somewhere in the middle. Like it's had a really influential legacy in terms of like the parts of it that people have taken and done things with. When like all the Jakku stuff, like we talked about Alphabet Squadron, Battlefront 2, whether it is like taking the stuff with Kiza and in the Shadow of the Sith and Yup Tashu, who has 2 deaths in canon. With all that stuff, the Shadow Council stuff, all the stuff with the contingency and Operation Cinder, and like all the different iterations that we've gotten with that, and like that built, that goes back to like again the way that these stories have been kind of like all the different kind of iterations of what Palpatine's master plan is, and again, people have different feelings about how they feel all that coheres.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, and like there's a lot in there, and like it has this interesting like place where it fits, because like I'm now even thinking like right now in the context of developing stories, like you've got the Mando, like what the Mandoverse is doing in terms of like its universe of shows and now movies, where like it's now kind of doing Aftermath too, where it's like here's now the actual end of the Empire, and like here's another resurgence of the Empire. So like it's got this kind of interesting place now that we've started to build all the things around it, like after it, coincident with it. Yeah.
So what you're saying is the Aftermath trilogy is a foundational part of Star Wars canon.
I mean, it is. I mean, there's like no, like even if you like hate the books, it is like it has been essential in that way in terms of like all the things that are introduced that are built upon in different ways. And again, people will have feelings about those, and then also will have their own feelings about like the directions that people have built upon. They will feel positively or negatively or somewhere in the middle about all that stuff. Yeah. But just from a kind of descriptive matter, it's been essential. It's been an essential building block in those ways.
Ouch. Yeah. Okay. Sure. You think this will be like eventually we'll get to the whatever the essential Legends version is of the canon books? This will be one of the flagship titles that they'll put, the Essential Canons collection or whatever.
I mean, it kind of has to be. If you're going to treat it as, I mean, it's not, but if you're going to treat it as the Heir to the Empire canon, in it being the foundational trilogy that kind of paves the way for everything else. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's an interesting point because the if not this, then what? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
You're gonna be okay.
Wow. Let's. So I was gonna make a joke about I'm not buying this trilogy again. I bought all three of these books for the first time because I didn't own a copy, and unfortunately, I ordered the paperback version of Life Debt, but
No.
hardcover versions of the other two,
No.
and so now there's this weird dip in the line,
Oh no.
and I'm like, I'm not buying this book again.
But
I
what if
just
you
can't.
did? But what if you did?
But what if no? What if I just find a library copy and never return it? Like, that's close to the same thing, right? Ugh.
There's been one question that I've been debating asking. I was going to ask it before and then I forgot and then we moved on to other things. And this may not be the best way to end this conversation, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Go for it.
Because we talked a lot about you know, this book, this trilogy ends up where it needs to be, and there are parts of it that are very foundational and important, but a lot of it is arguably forgettable.
Less than foundational.
This is a trilogy of books that were released. Do you think this could have been one book? Do you think we could have had a Shadow of Sith situation where everything that needed to be there in order to set up other things and leaving out all the rest could have fit in one book? Or do you think there's still too much story to be told where they had to put it in 3 because of the essential things they needed to hit in order to get to the next things?
Well, you go ahead, Devor.
I think at a minimum, it could have been a duology.
Okay.
I think you could have at least done 2 books. Could you have done 1?
If you focus down to the elements of what do they need, what is the function then? Like, what do we need to accomplish from a storytelling beat perspective to get people caught up? Like, what's the point of this book then?
Mhm.
If we're talking about a singular book, it has to be it has to be after end of Return of the Jedi, but before Force Awakens. It has to give us enough context for what's going on in the galaxy between those 2 major events, and they're 25 years apart. So I don't particularly think that the first book, Aftermath, does a good job of that, like, at all. Because the only thing that ties it to The Force Awakens occurs in the 3rd book. Like, nothing in the first 2 books plays any real role in getting you to The Force Awakens, right? And that's kind of the goal of this book from like a publishing perspective. Why does Disney want this book made? To get people excited for The Force Awakens. It's literally called The Journey to The Force Awakens right on the front of the cover. So if that's your goal, then you don't need the first and second book. You only need Empire's End. Now, can you take Empire's End and expand upon it enough for it to work as a standalone novel? For a book that makes sense from cover to cover, where characters are introduced, you latch onto them, and then you see their arcs resolve. Yeah, probably. It requires something that Lucasfilm's publishing teams, I think, have been loath to do, is write a book longer than 350 pages, stop double spacing things, and put more words on the page. Like, this might just be like the nittiest of picks to knit, but you don't have to limit the size of your book, or rather, you don't have to limit the scope of your story to the size of your book. It should be the other way around. Like, I'm looking at the Alphabet trilogy, and those books are some thick boys, right? And then you look next door to like Resistance Reborn, and it's half the size. The Queen's trilogy books, again, top 5 series of books. They're little guys.
Yeah.
So you can tell a full-fledged story. Like, you can, like, your reader will stick with you. This isn't like An episode of TV has to be 42 and a half minutes long to allow for commercial breaks. This is HBO. Make it an hour and 37 minutes. Whatever you need to do to tell a story. So yeah, I think you could take Empire's End. I think you could take the major story beats there, your character introductions, and I think you could make that thing sing. That's just, maybe I'm crazy. Wouldn't be the first time. But I think that's where I'm gonna land on that one. Not to discredit or to erase the other two.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying get rid of them because they're bad.
Right.
But because I think it can be done. But I think Disney likes it when we buy 3 books instead of 1.
That is likely the reason. I don't work in publishing. I'm not going to speculate, but that is probably a big reason why.
Devore's over here like duology, like the Hand of Thrawn duology, which
Star Wars fans are going to buy a duology because they're going to be mad there's not a third one.
and they did not buy those.
It's so interesting though to think of how like there could have been maybe a different way that the story was told, and obviously we have what we have, and that's not changing. But I just in an alternate timeline, we could have just had one big Shadow of the Sith sized book to kick all this off. I would have loved that personally, but that's
100%. Like, give us that Game of Thrones style of like, I want to know what happened to these characters 3 generations back, and put it in a book. If you had gotten Brandon Sanderson to write it, it'd be 1,078 pages long, and every page would be interesting. You may not understand what's going on until page 700, but that's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think about like the Force Unleashed series, with 2 entries to that, the third one planned and canceled. Like, and the story struggles dramatically. Like the end of Force Unleashed 2, for the 97% of the population who hasn't played or read the books, like there's a real problem at the end of that story.
A little bit.
a little bit. Devore, have you read those?
No.
Oh, you're gonna have an experience.
What if
I think I've observed osmotically through Twitter like how the Force Unleashed storyline ends.
Okay.
Oh, friend. Oh, dear
so
friend of mine,
I have
my
at least
sweet
some
summer
sense
child.
of the cliffhanger upon which it ends.
What if I told you that just prior to A New Hope, Darth Vader had been captured by the rebellion?
Yes. That is what I've. Darth Vader is arrested.
Yep. And they're just like, to be continued. Publishing companies were like, not so much. Wild stuff out here in the world of Star Wars.
Pretty much. Wow. This has been an experience for sure. I think it's good. I think it's healthy, like, because the reality is I didn't think of this series and expect to be able to drag people in here and they walk out of here totally changed. That's not realistic. I'm not that powerful. I'm not that persuasive. But I think it's healthy to like, honestly talk about things in these books that maybe didn't work for us and acknowledge that that's okay. And I think anyone who's listening who, has mixed feelings about the trilogy, whether you've read it or not, especially if you haven't actually read it and you've just absorbed other people's opinions, which happens a lot on the internet, encourage you to actually go back. Highly recommend the audiobooks if you're an audiobook person, because I think one thing about Chuck Wending's writing is it's served very well by audio. If you listen to it, it's a lot easier to grasp
That's a good
than
point.
reading it on a page. That's just, I think it's just, it works better that way. But if not, try to read them still, give them a chance. Of course, there are probably, if you didn't love them the first time, you're going to go into it knowing that there are things you're probably still not going to love. That's okay. But I think you might, like, I remembered things from the books that I'd forgotten about that I was rereading. And I was like, that's really nice. I liked that a lot. I didn't remember it, and now it's in my brain. That could happen to you. Highly recommend after this whole conversation that we've had, giving the books another try. Do it.
Absolutely. Always worth it.
Yes. Tell the world. tell the 2 people listening to this episode where they can find you in all of your Star Wars opinions.
You can find me on the Facebook page for our show, Star Wars Clashing Sabers. You can find us at our website, clashingsabers.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit where every dollar we get through our Patreon and through donations goes straight to buying and shipping books to schools across the country. How do we pick what schools? People will go to the website. You can nominate. So put a name and the teacher and the school they're at. We will contact them and we will send them a box of books for free to them. And we're talking about like boxes of like, $200 and $300 worth of stuff. So if you know a teacher, if you are a teacher, if you had a teacher, go to clashingsabers.org and go to nominate a teacher and we'll send them stuff. We love reading books. Books were a big, Star Wars books were a big part of me being a kid, and we can do that for somebody else.
I love that. That's so cool.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you for listening and asking really good questions. And I'm sorry if your heart rate hasn't come back down yet. I know you were nervous. I don't know why, but this was a blast.
You just never know what you're going to walk into sometimes.
That's true.
I don't know if you 2 have been plotting behind the scenes. Who knows?
Plotting is a strong word.
We have been plotting.
You know what? I'll never know at this point, and it's probably better that way.
Just go ahead and delete the text chain now, or just get rid of the evidence.
I guess people can find you also somewhere.
Yes. So you can find me over on X at ElectroReview. I'll say that every time. Always ironically. Only ever ironically.
I will laugh every single time.
Yes.
You do.
You can also hear me with Drew on Clashing Sabers on the main show, talking about Star Wars. And you can also hear me with you over on Space Swifties, a Star Wars and Taylor Swift podcast.
Look at all the podcasting we're doing. We're all such nerds.
Bunch of dorks.
Yes. And that's, you know what? That's the only place I want to be. I just want to hang out with people who like things. Yay.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Mondum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on our Substack at Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are a lot of ways you can support the show, and all of those are in the show notes. The newest way is to become one of our patrons. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker, and hopefully many more perks very, very soon. But of course, as always, listening to and sharing the show is the easiest and most helpful way to spread the love of Star Wars books. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.